Well, you've got 500 little pieces of cardboard that are sort of oddly shaped. But if you see the picture on the cover, you see that each one of these 500 pieces interlocks with other pieces to form altogether a very coherent
these humans free will. Now they're all confused. Don't these talking monkeys know that Eden has enough to go around? Sitting in this holy garden, silly monkeys, where they spun their bound to divide. Right into.
Now, I'm certainly not an expert on the Civil War, the United States Civil War. As I've mentioned before, when I was younger, I loved history, even from a very young age. But the periods of history that intrigued me the most and that I read about the most by far was European ancient history, European history as a whole up until, say, around the 1100s. And then my interest in the following centuries, I mean, I'm not trying to dismiss the importance of those centuries, but my interest doesn't seem to pick back up until we hit the 20th century and all through that century. So I'm not an expert on the Civil War. I was never terribly interested in it when I was much younger. It wasn't until I was in the 8th grade that I decided to write a report on General Robert E. Lee. And, you know, that's when I was like, wow, I need to learn more about this. And I'm certainly not an expert on it, though. I'm not really an expert on anything. But I view the Civil War largely the same way that I view World War I and World War II. I see it as a tragedy. Because, I mean, after all, brother wars, they are the most violent and vicious, usually. Now, my name on this channel is Southern Nordic. I chose it as a sort of a contradiction or an oxymoron. I chose Southern because, of course, I was born and raised here in Tennessee, East Tennessee. And although, and of course, you know, my ancestry comes from England and Denmark, but although my name is Southern, and I live here in Tennessee, my family actually fought for the North, for the Union. Because here in East Tennessee, you see, East Tennessee itself is a lot different than the other two regions of Tennessee, being Middle and West Tennessee. East Tennessee is mountainous. It's higher in elevation. It is the Southern Appalachians. And the culture here is different than it is from Middle and Western Tennessee. During the time leading up to the Civil War and when it occurred, there was much talk of East Tennessee following West Virginia's lead and breaking away from the rest of the state of Tennessee. And it was largely because of several different factors. In East Tennessee, slavery was virtually non-existent. There were some slaves, but there was very few large-scale plantations, and nothing that would compare to the plantations that were in other regions of the South. And a lot of the people here in East Tennessee that was alive then, they fought for the Union. And there was, as I said, a lot of talk that East Tennessee was going to break away from the rest of the state, much like West Virginia did, but it never came to fruition. My honestly, it would be my great-great-grandfather's oldest brother. He fought for the 13th Regiment, 13th Cavalry Regiment of Tennessee. They were based out of Knoxville, Tennessee. And funny enough, you know, this is considered a Tennessee Cavalry Regiment, but they served for the Union. It just goes to show how divided the state of Tennessee was during the Civil War. I made a video a while back about his life. I'll have it up here. He lived to be a very old man. He enlisted in the cavalry when he was 41 years old, and he didn't pass away until he was 98 years old in the year 1918. He's actually buried maybe half a mile up above my house back home. So I view the Civil War as a complete tragedy. The way I see it, if things would have been ideal, the states should have been able to govern themselves, and they should have been able to secede in peace. But of course, the powers that were, and the powers that were are still the same powers that be today. They wouldn't let this happen. Now, the issue of slavery. Personally, I find slavery in any form absolutely reprehensible. I think it is a horrible thing. And you know, oftentimes it is said that slavery was the root cause of the Civil War. It was an issue, but I don't believe it was the primary cause. It was just a factor. Now, I think it is reprehensible, and honestly, though, yeah, the slaves were freed, but I think you're very naive if you don't see that there is slavery today. Even here, I mean, can you imagine that a lot of these large corporations, I would imagine that they employ slave labor of some form. And honestly, if you know anything about the Federal Reserve, we're basically enslaved today. You know? Although it is, I guess you could say it's not the same form of slavery. We're indebted tremendously to this foreign national debt. And we pay exorbitantly high taxes. Our dollar grows ever more worthless because they just keep printing more. And after all, if you think about it, the best slaves are the ones who think they are free. I mean, can you honestly say nowadays that we truly own anything? You know, I would love, whenever I die, if I have a tombstone, I have often thought of what quote I would wish to have put on my tombstone. And I've always thought, "Here lies Dave." And in quotations, under my birth date and death date, I would want it to say, "He stuck it to the man." It's just a funny thought, but I would love to be able to say fuck you to the government, to Uncle Sam, and not pay taxes. I would love to. I mean, me and Miranda, we bought this little house here. We own back there to the ravine in the woods. I would love nothing more than when tax time comes along for us to pay the property taxes to just say, fuck you. I'm not paying shit. But if I did such a thing, if we did such a thing, sooner or later we would be evicted. If we tried to resist, we would be killed. So can you really say that we own anything nowadays? I don't think you can. But yeah, I'm going to show you a video now that my friend and his wife Sarah had recently sent to me. And I'm going to show the video clip right now. I'm going to close this video out with it. It's a very interesting perspective on the U.S. Civil War. You know, I'm sympathetic to both sides. Even though my family fought for the North, I'm sympathetic to the cause of the South. Not the whole slavery thing. And honestly, if you look into the history of slavery, it wasn't necessarily white people who owned all the slaves. Sure, there were white people that owned some slaves. I'm not saying that. But it's those fellow whites. I mean, after all, didn't they own many of the slave ships that brought the Africans over here? Of course, you know, they will call that some conspiracy, some anti-Semitic conspiracy. Whatever. We know you. And we know what you did. And we see what you're doing today. It's nothing new. And you know, I'm going to show this video. I would encourage you to check out his and her channel. I agree with many of the things that they say, and this is a very good video. I was going to edit a few things out of it, but you know what? Screw it. I'm going to show you the unedited, uncensored, full version. May get me a strike, but you know what? I don't care, okay? I don't want to get a strike, but if it happens, so what? It's going to happen sooner or later. So I'm going to show you this, and I'd encourage you to check out their channel. And the last thing I'm going to say before I show you the video. Here recently, after the events that happened on January 6th at the U.S. Capitol, whenever we had a bloody insurrection, I truly wish that it was an insurrection. And these people that rule over us, these politicians, I wish they would have gotten a harsh reminder exactly who they fucking work for. I wish they would have. But they didn't. Of course, they were escorted to safety. And the people that stormed the Capitol largely filed into it, took a bunch of selfies. And now they're basically being hunted down. You know, it was a complete failure. I think largely it was a psyop. But you hear the media, the talking heads in the media, talk about this glaring threat to our democracy. But let me ask you something. They say it's completely un-American, and it's not how we do it. The media just echoes the pleas of the frightened politicians who claim this. But let me ask you something. They call this un-American? Honestly, isn't rebelling the most American thing a person can do? I mean, do these stupid fucks not realize that our founding fathers rebelled? They rebelled against the British Crown. They were dangerous men, often called racist, but they were intelligent men. They rebelled. So let me ask you, why do you call it un-American? Although the people that were involved in the insurrection were horribly going about it completely the wrong way. They were unarmed. What did they expect was going to happen? And they just got in there and took fucking selfies for likes on social media. But honestly, isn't rebelling the most American thing you can do? Enjoy this video by Bleak Narratives and his wife Sarah. Thank y'all for watching. Bye-bye.
The spectacular failure that is Trump and the emerging societal collapse has left me dumbfounded and rethinking things that I learned as a child, like the Civil War, for instance. Were we really taught the truth in school? Personally, I don't think so. After much research, there's little doubt in my mind that the wrong side won. Let me explain. Our country has changed so much after 1864, and there's more than a strong case that it was for the worse. After the war, the states were unified under a federal government, which at the time was fairly small, nothing like what we see today. But this would be the seed from which a bloated nightmare of a beast would emerge, thus laying the groundwork for the mess we see today. Had the South won, each state would have continued to self-govern. Technically speaking, the South were fighting to keep America preserved as the founders envisioned. The North were trying to radically alter the entire country. When you fast forward to today, I think it's clear that not only did they radically alter the country, but it no longer even resembles America at all. Do the non-cuffed white Americans really believe that the current state of our country was what our founders had envisioned? A country subdivided in ethnic factions, desperately fighting to gain control of a bloated federal government? A country so subservient to the Jew we can't even build our own wall while we pay for their third? We have veered too far away from the traditional isolationist ethno-state that paved the way for this country, only to witness it slowly stolen, rebuilt as the world's premier tyrant. The new America has become the world's largest recorded experiment of Stockholm Syndrome. Our country was kidnapped, and now we openly praise the very same captors out of fear that we'll be labeled as racist and called everything from Nazis to homophobes. These realizations led me to research Robert E. Lee. I wanted to formulate my own take on this so-called dubious villain with my freshly altered perception of our nation's history. In public school, we were taught that General Lee was nothing but an evil, racist white man. However, after reading his diary, I found that General Lee and the Confederacy, like most Southern men still even today, were the real Americans. They died fighting a corrupt government, which provoked an unnecessary war resulting in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of white American men. Unlike we are taught, the South were clearly fighting for business as usual, whereas the North were the radical extremists advocating for unimaginable social and ethical policies. Before the war, Lincoln was responsible for heading up anti-Southern sentiments while tightening the noose on their agricultural export. The supposedly righteous North had long been doing everything in their power to force submission from the Confederate States, long before the war had even started. Contrary to popular belief, the Civil War was not fought over slavery. The real provocation came as the Union North threatened the ability of the states to self-govern. Our Constitution obviously had anticipated scenarios such as this, and so allowed each state to be independently functioning, with the right to self-govern. The only true purpose of federal government was to keep the states in check and assure no constitutional rights were ever violated. To imply hundreds of thousands of white Americans voluntarily fought and died to free slaves is ridiculous, an obvious Zionist fabrication. Having already calculated victory, Lincoln and his backers pushed for violence between the states only to serve their own maniacal agenda. Does any of this sound relevant to current events? Tensions finally reached a tipping point when South Carolina seceded, causing the battle at Fort Sumner and subsequently throwing America into a civil war. Few ever realized how dirty the Union fought. They not only had the industrial backing to produce more weapons and resources, but had already increased immigration to subsidize their rank. These primarily Irish immigrants were handed rifles right off the boat and ordered to the front line to earn their citizenship, some even by force. The North understood that they could beat the South simply by waiting them out. The South, unfortunately, didn't have the resources, not the manpower either, and they weren't willing to import soldiers in order to win a war to remain homogenous. Imagine the irony. Towards the end, the North even resorted to using scorched earth tactic, eventually forcing Lee into a surrender. It's hard to imagine a more anti-American moment in our country's history. Lincoln and the North deliberately began snuffing out our heritage. The South consisted mostly of Americans with a direct lineage to the settlers. When the Civil War ended, all we really had to show for it was a decimated native population, with the scene set for a federalized America, which many now refer to as the Beast. People today have a pre-programmed belief that the Confederacy were just hillbillies fighting for the right to keep slaves. At best, that's a gross fabrication. In reality, many of the people of the Southern Army were sophisticated and hard-working people. Brave men from the North and South died as a result of the Civil War. Only one side died fighting to protect the heritage of its country, though. It's unfortunate that they'll never truly receive the honor that they deserve. General Lee especially. His diary was beyond heartbreaking. Lee was the definition of a true American, an American willing to die to protect the heritage that allowed this nation to even exist in the first place. Lee expressed how he was an abolitionist and demanded abolition also came with repatriation, but the Zionists in the North would never allow this. The man truly wanted to do the right thing. But don't take my word for it. Pick up a copy of his diary and read it for yourself. Not only was he a profound writer, but you'd be hard-pressed to find a more principled man in our nation's history. Though he died in 1870, his spirit lives on in us true Americans. Like Robert E. Lee, we understand that this country was meant for people who look, speak, and most importantly, behave like us, not them.
There are really only two theories of history. Either things happen because nobody wants them to happen, they just happen anyway, or the important events which shape our national destinies happen because somebody wants them to happen.